Well, good morning. It's good to be with you guys this morning. For those of you who may not know me, if it's your first time here, my name is David Black. I'm the pastor here at the Town Center campus, and I'm glad that you are with us today. Something that we say often, and we mean it, is that following Jesus is costly. And what I mean by that is that everyone who's ever said yes to Jesus to follow him has also said at the same time no to something in their life. Those two things go together. And so I'm not sure what it is that you've left to follow him or that you're trying to leave or that he's calling you away from to follow him. But just know that that's something that everybody goes through. And so to that end, here's what we would say, that it's costly, but that it doesn't have to be lonely. And so a large part of what we're doing this morning is not only coming to gather together for God, but also to do so in a way that we see one another. And we know that you are not alone in that. And so if you're just checking out Jesus, meaning like you're not a follower of Jesus and you have questions, we're glad that you would just invite us into that conversation. We hope that you find a group of people to travel with and ask those questions, and just know that you can do that. If you are a follower of Jesus, got a couple things for you, just maybe housekeeping a little bit before we jump into what we're doing this morning in the text. I would say this week, in addition to being spring break for Cobb County, for those of us who follow Jesus, is a week that we tend to mark. And we mark this week, and some traditions call it Holy Week. But we mark this week by saying this is the week that we would recognize and remember the last week of Jesus' life leading up to the cross on Good Friday and then ultimately the resurrection on Easter. And so there's some ways that we want to engage with you, or at least give you an opportunity to engage with the Lord this week. Outside of our normal programming or scheduling. And so if you are a parent or a grandparent or a guardian of a child in Power Kids, you should have received an email already. There are things marking different days of the week that you can do at home with your child to help prepare their heart for Easter and coming up. And if you have not received that email, if you want to know how to get that, find someone with a red tag or talk to one of the kids workers and volunteers as you're picking up today. So if you are an adult who doesn't have kids, or if you are an adult with kids, something that we are all doing together, on Friday, we will have our Good Friday communion. And so if you've never been part of a communion with us before, it's something that we enjoy. I enjoy it. It's a kind of a family time of the people of God. If you're exploring Jesus, you're more than welcome to come and observe. But there's just portions of it that we just say, hey, we'd love for you to observe. But you're more than welcome to do that. It's on Friday at 6:30. We'd ask that if you're coming and you have the ability, bring a dessert to share. And we're going to spend some time specifically focused around the cross and what makes Good Friday actually good amidst all of the crucifixion and further. And then on Easter Sunday, we'll be gathering here at 11 o'clock as usual, but obviously a different emphasis. So a lot of the things coming up, just want to make you aware of that so that you can engage with it. We have been in a series leading up to Easter and leading up to this week entitled Jesus is Jesus. And the reason we're doing that is because we believe that even as followers of Jesus, it is easy for us to come up with a version of Jesus that actually is not the person of Jesus in the Bible. And so what we've said is, what would it look like for us all leading up to Easter, where we actually celebrate what Jesus does, to first go, who is Jesus? And spend time face-to-face with him. And perhaps no other author of Scripture does this better than a guy named John. John was a fisherman, and he wrote what is called the Gospel of John, or the Good News of John, and it is his account of the mission and vision of Jesus Christ. So he follows him around, writes down what he says, writes down what he sees, and he does it, interestingly, in a very selective way. He only gives us about 21 days with Jesus, and yet he gives us all of Jesus face to face. He immerses us. He almost shoves Jesus in your face a little bit so that he's unavoidable. And the reason that he does that, he tells us in John 20, chapter 20, he says this, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book." And I would love to know what some of those are, but he doesn't tell us. "But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah," that's the word Christ, "the Son of God. And not just that you might believe that, but by believing or trusting, you actually might have life in his name." So we're not just here to talk about what Jesus did so that you might be enlightened educationally, although hopefully you learned something. We're actually here to encounter Jesus so that you might walk out with life. And it's the thing that you need. And it's honestly the most precious thing in the universe, the life that Jesus offers. And the truth is that as a pastor, my biggest fear, and I've told you this all series, is not that you would ultimately reject Jesus, but ultimately that you would replace him. That you could somehow replace him with someone other than who he really is. Maybe a version that you just think is out there that culture's handing you. So we've been looking at what John gives us, and we call them signs. John calls them signs. And today, we're going to look at a sign that I purposely saved for today. And in a minute, you'll see why. But it's out of order. And this actually happened early in Jesus' ministry. After his first miracle, we're told that what we're reading today happened at that time. And you'll see why in a moment. But I'm going to read it for you. And it's found in John chapter 2, verse 12 through 21. And this is what John says. After this, meaning after Jesus turned the water into wine, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered that it was written, meaning in the Old Testament, the scriptures, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Jesus' life spans about 33 years, 3 of which were mainly his public ministry. So the sign that we're looking at today is really Jesus cleaning house, which we'll get to in a moment. But what I want you to see is that he spent about 3 years publicly doing what he did before he was publicly executed on the cross, what we would look at as from Friday. What's interesting is that today is something in church history called Palm Sunday. And on Palm Sunday, Jesus rides into Jerusalem publicly on the back of a donkey, which was like a 1965 Mustang. It was a throwback because the last guy who drove that animal, his name was King David. And so he goes and finds a classic ride, and he drives into town, and everybody else is like, "Oh my goodness, the king is here." Okay, so that's what he does. On Sunday, he goes in, looks around, he goes back home. Where he was staying, Bethany. On Monday, he comes back, and on Monday, he does what we just read about, but at a second time. And so you'll see that here. Right before, in the middle of Holy Week, on Monday, after he rides in publicly, he goes and he throws over the tables and he chases people out. But what's fascinating, and what scholars tend to debate about, but we can talk about that another time, what's fascinating is that Jesus seems to bookend his public ministry with a public visit to clean house at the temple. What we just read actually happens at the beginning of his ministry. So he did it twice, it seems. And so here we have John going, here's Jesus, he's relatively unknown. His first public act is cleaning the temple. One of his last public acts before the crucifixion was cleaning the temple. Now, if I told you you're going to have a career and on either side you're going to bookend that public career with something, you're probably thinking that's going to be a significant thing, right? So here's what I want to do for today. A little bit different than normal, but what I want to do today is just ask a couple questions so that we might understand this, because I think understanding this sign actually sets us up for the week ahead for what we will encounter with Christ. And there's a reason I think Jesus does this. So a couple questions we're going to ask. First sign is this: what makes this a sign or a miracle? Okay, Jesus isn't healing anybody. Nobody comes back from the dead. What's going on here? What makes this a sign? Second question we're going to ask today is this: what does it mean? And then the third question, and kind of where I want to live for a little bit later on, is this: what does it matter to us? Okay, because last time I checked, this isn't a temple. Not many of us would say, "Hey, we're Orthodox Jews, so what in the world does that matter for us?" Okay, so why is this a sign? First question: what makes this a sign? As I said, Jesus isn't walking up and going, "Boom, water is wine." He isn't going, "Hey, I'm storm, peace be still. He's not walking out and going, demons leave. He's not going, hey, they look dead, but now they're alive. Like, that's not what he's doing. He's actually walking in a place and saying, everybody get out. And why is that a miracle? Well, I think we got to understand what's happening here. Okay, and this may be a little bit historic for you, and so some of you are like, yeah. Others of you are like, is there a point? And I promise, like, that's coming, so stay with me, okay? A little bit here, this matters. And it also might be a little bit why I get excited in the beginning. Because what you have to understand is what's happening in Jerusalem at this time. But we're told that as Jesus goes in, he goes into the temple. So the temple in this case, right there, that we're told about, is actually a temple that a guy named Herod built. Herod would have been the king of the Jews or the governor of that area, more or less, but not really. He was a figurehead for the Jewish people that Rome tolerated and also the people tolerated. Nobody liked Herod. He was kind of all alone, and he deserved it, but you can go and look at that. So he creates this temple. Now, this temple right here, you can see, has an outer courtyard and an inner area. Herod's temple took 10,000 craftsmen 46 years to construct up to this point in time, and it was not even finished. It was huge. It covered about 35 acres. A lot of people have attempted to show the size and scale of this. This next picture is a guy, he spent 30 years, almost as long as them building the real thing, building this tiny miniature thing. And I don't know if it's his basement or what, or if he's married, or if he was married, I'm not sure, right? But this is his thing. This is what he did for 30 years. He made a little tiny miniature model. Someone took less time, but equally as detailed in Minecraft right here. They made a Herod's temple in Minecraft. I don't know. You like Minecraft and you study the Bible, and next thing you know, honey, I made Herod's temple. There you go. That's it. For us, as a matter of scale, we got 35 acres between, this is the mall, where that little suitcase is. It looks like this. So you just drop it on the footprint of the mall, roughly about right there. So this is a giant, giant complex. The temple would have been filled with people, especially during this time. The court of the Gentiles, which is where this took place, is actually that outside courtyard. So you can see it's not like off to one side or the left, it's all the way around it. And the Gentiles would have been anybody who's not Jewish, which is fascinating to me that Jesus and God made an allotment in his place of worship for people who were not ethnically Jewish. That's interesting to me. I just find that fascinating. In fact, we find this in Kings chapter 8. It says this, when Solomon dedicated not Herod's temple, but the former temple, likewise, when a foreigner who is not of your people, Israel, comes from faraway country for your name's sake, this is Solomon praying to God, he says, here in heaven, your dwelling place. Notice he's not saying in this temple where you live. You live up there, but this is where we meet you. And do according to all for which the foreigner calls to you, in order that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you. That's what that outside court was for, that all the peoples of the earth might know the name of God and fear him. Now, this temple would have been the central area of religious life at that time, social life. It would have also been the central area of the seat of justice for the Jewish people. It would have been pivotal to what was going on. It was a place that was constantly visited, and specifically at this time of year, because we're told that it's Passover. So here's how you need to think about Passover if you're an Orthodox Jewish individual alive during this time. You need to think of it like Christmas. Now, they would get mad at me for making that comparison, but here's the comparison that needs to be made. It's this, that you spend a lot of time preparing for it. It was like the big holiday of the year. It was the one where you would go, every Jewish individual who was a God-fearing Jewish individual would go up to the temple because they would make a sacrifice there because they were celebrating and remembering something that was pivotal in their past. It would take months of preparation. The whole city would start preparing. They'd pave roads. They'd prepare potholes. The inns in town would make extra room. If you had a home, you'd move out of town and put it on Airbnb so someone else could rent it, like that kind of thing. Decorations are going up. You're preparing your home spiritually and physically for this. And so a lot has gone into this. We're told in Exodus chapter 12, when Moses was talking to the people about the 10th plague that would come in, and they had to put blood on the doorpost, and they'd kill a lamb for that. Here's what God says to them. This day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast of the Lord throughout your generations. And when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? You shall say, it is a sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, for he passed over the house of the people of Israel in Egypt, and when he struck the Egyptians, he spared our houses. God passed over us. And they remember this. The lamb dies, we put blood on the doorposts, God passes over us graciously and saves us out of slavery into freedom. That's what they were celebrating. And Jesus comes in on the biggest day leading up to this. And what you need to know is that in that time, in Passover, Jerusalem went from about 300,000 people to 2.7 million. 2.7 million. In the week of Passover, 250,000 animals were sacrificed. That's a lot. Think about that. 250,000 animals were sacrificed during that time. So you've got people from all over, not only Jerusalem and Judea and the rest of the world, because people who converted to Judaism from other parts of the Roman Empire were coming in. They're all jam-packed in this outer court area, and it is bustling and hustling. And like one time when you visit the mall, again, is Christmas. Like it's like that, right? And everything's happening in this moment. Now, we're also told that when he went in there, he finds those who are selling oxen and sheep and pigeons and the money changers. Now, what's going on there? Well, there was something that would happen, and it was a normal everyday practice. It was a necessity of running a temple. You would have to have animals, because if you had to have sacrifices and someone shows up and they're like, I forgot my animal, you'd be like, what are you doing, man? But, oh, here's one right here. So as you imagine, outside the temple, they would set up shops selling animals. And outside the temple, we were told they weren't allowed to bring in coins with Caesar's face on it, because if you were invaded by another people group who oppressed your people, and at the very center of your worship, you probably wouldn't want that face around, right? So and also they would see it as an idol. And so they'd say, give us the Roman money and we'll give you Jewish currency. You can take that in. And that would happen outside the temple. But over time, it crept in, right? Kind of just, it's like English ivy. If you have that at your house, you don't have a little of it, ever. It just keeps growing. You can't, so it creeps in. It gets inside into the Gentile courts. And here's what happened. The people who ruled the temple, they realized they could make money off of it. And so you would never travel from far away with a lamb to offer at the temple, because when you get there, a couple things would happen. One, the lamb maybe died on the way. Maybe you got hungry, right? Maybe you got robbed. Maybe you got sick. When you get there, it's a lot easier to buy it there. And then when you get there, there's this thing that happens. The priests would have to come out, and they would have to certify it. And so the priests would come out, and here's what they learned, that you could look at a lamb from another part of the country and deny it. And if they denied it, you couldn't offer it. Doesn't matter if your priest back home said it was good. Didn't matter if it was good when you left back home. When you get there, if they go, nope, it's not worthy, you got to find another animal. You're like, well, where am I going to get another animal from? And they'd go, what do you know? As it happens, we're selling them right here. And as it would happen, we're selling them for a lot more than you bought this one back home. See how that works? It's a little bit like this. Popcorn is cheap, except it's not cheap at the theater. Popcorn is marked up 1,275%. And that's what they would do with the lambs and the sheep and the doves. And they would do that with the exchange rate too. And so what would happen is you had this broken system where people would come in and they would be extorted. And it's like, what do you know? It's like an inspector says it's not good. Your sacrifice isn't good. Nope, go buy one from us. And you'd be like, but I don't have any money. This is all I have. Well, you got to do it. And it would go and go and go and go and go and go and go. And what meant to be a house of prayer and a place of connection with the Lord became a house of power and extortion and everything else. It's interesting. They called it something. They called it an Annas' bazaar. Annas was the high priest. It was this bazaar. That's what everybody's like this. So it's loud animals and all this stuff. One time, people got mad at Annas. They started throwing lemons at him. And we're told this, that his mercenary army, according to the record, slaughtered all the people in the courtyard in the multiples of thousands for throwing lemons at him. So the temple guard was 300 people, and they were always on duty. You had 300 officers always at the ready who lived at the temple. Because as you imagine, things get a little like heated when you suddenly start extorting people. Right? So all that's going in. And now here's what you need to understand. Into the middle of that walks an virtually unknown guy from a backwater town with a jump rope. And we're told he does this. He drove them all out of the temple. He cleared it. So if I gave you a jump rope and said, go clear out the parking lot of the mall right now, just you. The cops are out there. There's 300 of them. Go for it. You'd be like, no way. And Jesus comes in and he does it. It's fascinating. He actually physically shoves everybody out. Public. Now, maybe you've grown up and you're like, that doesn't sound like the Jesus that I know. Some of you are like, that's my Jesus, that's the one, right? This is the verse you live, this is your life's verse right here, right? You're like, get him out. What's going on here? What's going on? Because it doesn't sound like, hey, just love each other, peace be with you. Like none of that. Like what's going on in this? And I think that raises this question here. What does this mean? What does it mean? Well, we're told a little bit. Jesus says something, and his disciples say something too. He says, he told those who sold the pigeons, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade. Hopefully you understand now like why he's saying that. But then his disciples remembered that it was written, this is Psalm 69. They remember, it would have been a song that they sung as a kid, since a boy. They put that together, and they're like, oh yeah, zeal for your house will consume me. When you think about consume me, that sounds odd to us, but we use it this way. Something's eating at me, right? And we go, oh, that makes sense. That's what he's saying. Something's eating at me. Zeal. The word zeal here is it's a very interesting word. It's an onomatopoeia, which means it sounds like the thing that it represents. So bang, snap, zip, zap, Batman cartoons, like that kind of thing, right? It sounds like that. It sounded like boiling water to them. Zealous, like this. And it means to boil over, to have warmth of feeling or against, to be zealous. And it's really closely related to this word. And this is what we would say. Here's what it means. Jesus is jealous. Say, Jesus is jealous? I didn't think jealousy was good. What do you mean Jesus is jealous? Well, here's what we tend to think of. We tend to think about jealousy as a negative connotation, which it can be. So I would say this, jealous of equals envy. You're jealous of your neighbor because they got a new ride? They got lots of things? I was like, hey, that's envious. You're jealous of your sister or brother because they're doing better than you? Jealous of your employer? Jealous of your coworker? Right? That's negative connotation. Jealous for equals zeal. And what that means is that there's like a passion of like, oh, that's just eating at me. That's not right. Someone's got to do something about that. And what we find out in the Bible is that God is a very jealous God. He's jealous for something. In fact, we find all this scripture that says that. In fact, in the Ten Commandments, the same passage that he gives the Ten Commandments, he says this, talking about not having other gods. He says, you shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, for you shall worship no other gods, for the Lord's whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. He told this to them twice, once before the golden calf and once after, because they didn't seem to hear him the first time. Later on, he'd say this, and Judah, not a person, but the nation, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins that they committed, more than all that their fathers had done, which is a feat. It's like I double dare you, challenge accepted. They did that. Psalm 78 says this, it says, for they provoked him, speaking to God, to anger for their high places. That would have been temples and places of worship to other gods. They moved him to jealousy with their idols. Here's what you find out. There's like this like triangle of jealousy that God is jealous for in the Bible. The first thing is his honor and his name and his glory. He doesn't want anyone stealing that. Think of that as like copyright, right? Or like, if you went ahead and you plagiarized something, it's like, I don't want anyone else getting credit for the thing that I did. I want people to know who I am. I don't know imposters. And then he would say that holiness just means not common. It means something set apart, other, like belonging to him. He's like, when you mix my stuff in with all the other stuff. You don't recognize my name and my character and who I am. And I care about that. And then there's another thing which is fascinating. He cares about that his people love him. God is a monogamous God in that nature. What he's saying is this: I want one person, one relationship, one people. I don't want to be shared with others. Now, if your spouse or your significant other said, I don't want to be shared, you'd be like, good, right? And that's the same thing here. In fact, J.I. Packer says this, that God's jealousy is not a compound of frustration, envy, and spite, as human jealousy so often is, but appears instead to preserve something supremely precious. I am jealous for my children's innocence. Now, they're not innocent. Don't let them fool you. But you know what I mean. It matters to me that they stay children, right? And so anything that gets in the way of that, I'm going to not have a great time with. Jesus walks in and he goes, your honor and your name and your glory and your holiness and a relationship that I am jealous for that. And he goes, get me. And he picks up reeds and whips them together, which isn't a very effective whip, which tells you it's even more of a sign, right? He didn't really even pick up like a weapon that would be he really is just like, oh, this has to be fixed. Best illustration I could come up with, I was thinking about this. It reminds me of a house that I rented with some college friends right after we got out of college. One of them was taking a victory lap, so a fifth-year senior, and then I had started a new job, and another dude was working for a guy across the street, and we just kind of lived an extended college in a neighborhood with other people. If you own a house and you're an adult and you care about the value of your house, you might be a little afraid of some ex-college guys moving in next door for good reason. And we lived up to that. At one point, this is not an exaggeration, at one point I was mowing the front yard and a guy drove by in a van and just golf clapped me, like slow clapped as I was doing it, because we let the grass grow super high. Here's what we would do. We would play bocce ball in the front yard and backyard, and we'd dig sand traps and create like high grass traps around, and it just looked ridiculous. It looked awful. We would decorate ridiculously for Christmas, right? We were told we weren't allowed to paint the inside of that house. We painted the inside of that house. And we didn't paint any like light colors either. We're talking like a deep red and blue and dark. It was crazy. We didn't, just to be fair, we did not treat that house well. It was an older lady's first rental. And she had raised her kids there for part of her life. And I'll never forget the day when we're all standing in our boxers trying to do something utterly stupid in the kitchen, and we look up and she's at the back sliding glass door because somebody called code enforcement on her rental. And we look up and we go, oh man, let's put on some pants and talk to this lady. Why? Why do we feel that way all of a sudden? Because we realize that something that is hers, that she cares about, is utterly in ruin. Jesus walks in and he sees his temple with his people, a place that's to be prayed, where prayer and singing and rejoicing and love of God is supposed to be connected. And he goes, people are being extorted, excluded. There's a corrupt and broken system, and the love of money has eclipsed the love of God. And he goes, I gotta do something with this. Right? Now, what does that mean for us? As best as I can, with the time that I have left, I think we could apply this a lot of ways, but I just want to point out three things that I think matter for us. That's this. First, Jesus doesn't let us play religious games. He could have, think about it, other people were walking in there. Other people knew it was broken, right? Other people who were religious people, who were leaders of religious people, knew what was going on. And yet it took Jesus walking in and going, this is not right. I got to do something. He's like, I can't let this continue. Jesus is not content to allow us to play some sort of religious game with him. We want to. Now, growing up in church, I was taught that the most dangerous game that you could play was the Ouija board. If you wanted to guarantee that you would be utterly apart from God forever, you would buy something from Parker Brothers with a little plastic triangle on it, put your hands on it, and say, let's see where it goes, right? That is not I would not advise it, but that is not the most dangerous game that you can play. You know the most dangerous game you can play? Church. You play church. And Jesus goes, I don't want you to play some spiritual dangerous game. I want it to be real. And it matters to Jesus that it's real. In fact, Annie Dillard, she writes this, does anyone, talking about church, does anyone have the foggiest idea of what sort of power we so blithely invoke? It is madness to wear ladies' straw hats and velvet hats to church. We should be all wearing crash helmets. Ushers should be issuing us life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to our pews. We would say to our modularly stacking padded chairs. What's she saying? She's like, do we understand what we're doing? Do we get it? That's entirely possible to have filled churches and yet empty hearts. Somebody speaking of the Western church said that we would be known for, that there's a blight that we are navigating in our time. And he so eloquently put it, but I think aptly put it as well. He said, we end up with selfish shepherds and shallow services and starving sheep. And as a pastor, I go, man, that's true. It's true. Because you know what God is jealous for besides his name? What? He's jealous for your heart. He wants to know you. He doesn't want to sit down and play a religious game. He wants you to love him. He wants you to pray to him and hear you and answer you so that you might know his name is great, because that's been his plan all along. That's why Paul, when he's talking to the church, he's talking to religious church followers of Jesus. In 1 Corinthians, he says this, shall we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? Talking about stuff they were just entertaining in their life. They were playing a game. And he's like, no, guys, when you get together, you got to understand, we're doing something here. There is God present. He doesn't live in a building. He lives in you. And then later on, James says the exact same thing. He says, or do you suppose it is to no purpose that the scripture says he yearns jealously over the Spirit that he made to dwell in us? In other words, in the Old Testament, the Spirit of God dwelt in the temple. That's what they believe and taught. In the New Testament, the Spirit of God dwells in people. And he goes, the same care and passion that Jesus has that people might connect with God inside of that space is the same passion and care that Jesus has that people might connect with God in you and in us. That they might see him there and that he might be there and that you might know him fully. He's passionate about that in your life. It's not a small thing. Which means this, that Jesus has the right to rearrange your life. The Jewish religious leaders who were in charge of the temple, they were in charge of this broken system. In fact, they'd set up this broken system. They come to him and they have a question. By the way, their question isn't, oh my goodness, how did you do that? Their question isn't, we are sorry, we are wrong. Their question is this, what sign do you show us for doing these things? And if you're Jesus or any thinking person, you're like, I just did that sign. What do you mean? It's like someone being like, you can't do that in here. Well, I just did. In other words, they're going, what authority? Some versions say that. What authority? What right? Who are you to think that you can get a jump rope and suddenly take control of this place? Now, Jesus is better than me, because he would have been like, I would have been like, what are you talking about? I'm God. This is my place. But he doesn't say that to him. He says something else, which we'll get to in a moment. But don't miss that they're going, who says you can move stuff around? Who are you to change and mess with the broken system? Which, another side thing, God cares more about the purity of his church than you do. He takes responsibility for that. He doesn't look at Peter and James and Judas and John and go, guys, get the whips, let's go. He's like, I'm going to do this. He doesn't. They're just watching. So for those of you in here who are just going, like, church has been a corrupt and broken system, and I wish someone would rearrange it. Look, God gets that. And it's not your responsibility to judge it and fix it. It's his. He died for it. And honestly, I would much rather deal with you than him. He loves it. So he has the right to rearrange it. He also then has the right to rearrange our lives. They should have known this, because Malachi chapter 3 has a prophecy about the coming Messiah, and it says this, the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. But who can endure the day of his coming, and who can stand when he appears? For he's like a refiner's fire. That would be like talking about melting down metal and getting all the impurities out, and like fuller's soap. Fuller's soap would have been an acid to wipe away stains. He's like, when God shows up to his temple, he is going to purify it and clean out the stains. And he can rearrange it and do it. And that's exactly what he wants to do in your life, if you know him. See, this is not some weird version of undercover boss. That's not how God works. It isn't like, oh, my goodness, the boss is here. Shape up. Jesus didn't go in and worship and go, guys, I've been here for a little while. It's me, rips off the mustache and the beard, and everyone goes, oh, it's the Messiah. That's not how that works. There's no undercover at all. He's like, I'm the boss. That's what he does. Do you realize that's how they're interacting with him? Who do you think you are? And he's like, every chance that he gets, he's going, I'm in charge. This is about me. I am the king, and this is the place where I am worshiped. What he's trying to get across. There are whole types of people, or whole groups of humanity who live their life like God is undercover boss. Like at the end of their life, they're going to get to there. He's going to take off the mask and the beard, and they're going to go like, oh, my goodness. And then he's going to then begin reviewing the past life and going, well, I was there for this, and that wasn't great. That's not how God works. He doesn't wait till the end. He's actively trying to go, I'm here. It's me. Like, I want to do something in your life. I want to rearrange things in your life. I have the authority to do that, and I'm interested. I would put it this way. God doesn't decorate. He renovates. He's not here just to decorate our life and put some little things that make us better. He's like, I want to change you. In fact, a guy said it much better than me in Mere Christianity when he wrote this. He said, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house at first. Perhaps you can understand what he's doing. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? He's building quite a different house from the one you're thinking of. He intends to come and live it in himself. That's how it works. And so Jesus comes in, and listen, he has the authority and he has the power, and he cleans out thousands of people from the outside of this temple. He does it twice. I think he can handle whatever's occupying the court of your heart. I think he can do that. Like, I think he has the power and the ability to come in and go, whatever it is that's creeping in like English ivy, that you just keep spraying pesticide on, you're about ready to order goats. God comes in and he goes, this is my place. And I want to purify it. I want to move it and rearrange it. And I want to make it for a place that I can dwell in. Let me do that. And does that hurt? Yeah. Is it uncomfortable? Absolutely. Do you have prayers with him where you're like, what gives you the right to do this? 100%. But it's not a surprise. And it's not a mystery. It's something he longs and loves to do. Maybe you're sitting here and you're going, no, I don't know, man. You don't know my heart. And you're right, I don't know your heart, but I know mine. You might be sitting there going, I got a lot of stuff. And I got a lot of junk. And I know they had a corrupt and broken system, but you want to talk about a corrupt and broken system? Let's talk about what's going on in me. Right? Well, the good news is that Jesus came to fix a broken and corrupt system. And the way that he came to do that was to be broken. And that's what he talks about. At least the third thing, that's this. I think not only does he want to rearrange our life, but he's changed the way we come to God. Jesus has changed the way that we come to God fundamentally. You see, up until this time, the way that you met God was in the temple. You got in the temple. And if you were a Gentile, you can go any further than the court. The best you got was the Gentile court. Couldn't go on the inside. The best you caught was Annas' Bazaar. You're in there, animals are bleeding. That's the best you got. That's the closest that you could get ever. And that's only after doing certain things to even get in there. And they say to him, what gives you the right? Jesus looks back at them, and here's what he says. He says, destroy this temple, and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. And they think he's joking, but Jesus isn't joking. They think he's joking, and with good reason. It took 46 years. They weren't even done building it. The rocks were as big as the ceiling is to the floor, and like wide. They're huge. And they're like, one, you're going to destroy it, and then you're going to rebuild it in 3 days? That's ridiculous. Also, Jesus is honestly being a little bit threatening here. He's almost like saying, I got a bomb strapped to my chest. Because he's talking about some serious history. If you remember, the Temple of Solomon was much better than Herod's, and it was destroyed. And it was destroyed by a nation called Babylon. And Babylon came in and razed the temple. They killed it. They made it such a disaster and wasteland that when they rebuilt the next one, the people who remembered the former one, they cried. They're like, this isn't even good. Like, why do we have this styrofoam plastic temple? We missed the old one. And the reason that temple was destroyed was because the people's sin got so severe that God's like, I got to do something. He told them time. A lot of what we read about God's jealousy is told about that time. They actually set up an idol in the temple. And they were worshiping it actively. And God's like, no. And in some ways, what Jesus is saying this, he's saying, guys, you're doing it again. He's saying it's happening again. Like the sin of self and the sin of everything, it's creeping in again. And guess what? It's going to end up ruining this place too. But he goes, I got a solution for that. I got a solution for that. And it's not this temple. He actually goes, it's me. You have God of the universe sitting there and going, you see that altar? That's me. You see that animal? That sacrifice? That's me. You see those priests? That's me. You see this building? That's me. He's saying, I have come to be a place in which everyone from every nation and place and people on the face of the earth can meet a holy God and live. That's crazy. And the fascinating thing is he's not just dealing with a little bit of love of money and graft and corruption. He's actually going, I'm not going to kick out all the sin of the world. I'm actually going to bring it in. I'm going to bring in the sin of the world. And I'm going to go to a cross and I'm going to die in place of the sin of that world. And I'm not going to cleanse it with a sword or a whip or chase you off in fear. I'm going to cleanse it by dying, by being hung on a tree, by being the recipient of a spear in my side. I am going to bleed out so that you don't. And we're told that when Jesus died on the cross on Friday, that the veil of the temple, the thing that kept people out from the holiest place, that it was torn in two from the top to the bottom. Top to the bottom. Meaning access is granted. Meaning anybody can come in. I don't think it's an accident that this took place in the court of the Gentiles. I think he's making room. And he has made a room. And he has made a way. And the work that he begins on the cross in cleaning out your life and cleansing yourself works in you and through you for the rest of your life. And so my hope today and this morning and what we're talking about is some of you, you're probably here and you're thinking, oh yeah, Easter's coming and we get to that, but you have to understand that comes at a cost of the King. And maybe this morning as we're kind of kicking off our hearts to next Sunday, some of you might be here and you might go, to be honest, I've been playing game. And Easter's felt a little bit like a game this year. And I've forgotten really what this is about. Some of you are here and maybe God is saying to you, I've shown up, but he hasn't brought a whip. And the reason he hasn't brought a whip is because he bore the lashes on Friday so he could show up into your life and lovingly and graciously begin to change and rearrange things. And you're like, why are you here? Who told you to show up? And he's like, I made you, man. I love you. I know you. If you'd let me work. And then maybe some of us are here and for you, maybe you've never really understood how you come to God or why it is that you can come to God or why we could even sing and celebrate. And as somebody who maybe was born apart from anything religious, you're like, I don't get all that stuff. But for you, maybe the first time God's speaking to you and going, oh, look, I have made a way for you to come to me. And I want to know you. And I want you to know me. So I'm just going to pray. I'm going to ask God to work. I'm going to give him permission if I can, like he needs my permission. But I just want to say for us that he doesn't live in this house. Like he doesn't live at 3005 Ring Road in this building we built. He lives in the hearts of his people. And so God, I just pray that you would have permission this morning to do what only you can do. And for some of us, that looks like coming in and beating back the sin and throwing it out. For others of us, that means reminding us that we have your Spirit and that you care about that deeply. And for others of us, it's that we don't have to go to a place to worship once a week to see you, but that you inhabit our hearts. Lord, and for others of us, that just means that we get to come to you for the first time and say, take our sin and clean it once and for all, because you're a king and we're not. Lord, we thank you for your willingness to do that. It's in your son's name we pray.